Hello and welcome to another Victoria 3 Developer Diary. This time we're going to be talking about rank and prestige in Victoria 3. But first of all, let's have a look at this lovely piece of artwork once again. It is one that I believe we've seen before, but for the life of me I can't place it. I believe it may have been the announcement trailers perhaps showed it. But it's lovely. It's got a bunch of the different cultures already in there. It's kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different things. It's also got various sites of note in the background. Obviously, the Eiffel Tower is very prominent there, as is the... I'm pretty sure that's the Parthenon in Greece, where the Elgin marbles came from. That could possibly be just a bunch of different things there. Is that like the Sistine Chapel maybe with the dome there? I don't know. But either way, it's not a real place. It's an amalgamation of a bunch of different buildings from a bunch of different places. And again, the art style is lovely, and I like it. And that's pretty much all I got to say on that one, really. It's great. It's great. But you know what else is great? Today's Dev Diary. So let us dive into it with that panel and talk about rank and prestige. Happy Thursday and welcome to a brand new Dev Diary for Victoria 3. Today we'll be finally switching away from talking about economy and politics and starting a string of diplomacy-oriented Dev Diaries, of which the first is this one. We'll be covering rank and prestige, two interconnected mechanics that play a very central role in how diplomatic matters play out in the game. Rank is a mechanic that also existed in both previous Victoria games and is a measure of how glorious and influential a country is in the eyes of the rest of the world. What rank a country has, be it a mighty great power or a largely irrelevant unrecognized power, is determined by two factors: prestige, which we'll be explaining below, and recognition. So, recognition is something that did not exist in Victoria 2, but prestige did, though I am fairly certain that it is very different the way that prestige works in Victoria 3, and it merely shares a name. So any prior connotations you have about, oh, well, I'll just, the prestige in Victoria 2 worked this way, so I'm going to expect that it works the same. It doesn't. So talk about recognition. It's important to note that we're not talking about recognition in the more commonly used term when applying to nations, that is, whether other countries recognize the nation's independence and existence in the first place. Rather, it's a measure of whether the reigning, probably mostly European, great powers as a whole see the country as a potential equal, whether the country could potentially be included as a decision maker in said system if they grew strong enough. We're not going to go too deep into this specific topic today, which is good because, well, it makes this Dev Diary probably a bit too long, but also the fact that they are kind of hinting that it needs to get a little bit of a deeper dive, because how does the game, or how does the AI, or how do the AI great powers in Victoria 3 determine whether another country could be a potential equal? What even does a potential equal mean? Whether it could be included as a decision maker? Decision maker in what? What kind of decisions are we talking about? It's not as if the United Nations exist in this time, right? So, what mean? Let's move on though. And see what unrecognized and recognized actually means. So, the gist of it is that countries start the game either unrecognized or recognized, and unrecognized countries have to gain or force recognition in order to properly climb the rank ladder. I think one historical example that we can draw on for this, a very famous one, would be Japan. Japan would probably be seen as unrecognized at the start of the game, and in Victoria 2, of course, Japan started as uncivilized, which is a very loaded term and definitely not really applicable. So it's good that that's something that they're moving away from, in my eyes. But they start out as uncivilized or unrecognized, and the way that Japan historically got the recognition that that they ended up having was by defeating Russia in the Russo-Japanese War of 18 something or other. I'm terrible with dates, apologies for that. But they beat Russia, and then the great powers of the world went, oh, yeah, Japan's a thing. We recognize this country as a thing. And yeah, that's kind of how that happened. So, the unrecognized and recognized system replaces the civilized and uncivilized system of Victoria 1 and 2, and a difference from those games is that being an unrecognized country is a purely diplomatic status with diplomatic penalties. A country does not become inherently worse at constructing factories or fighting wars by virtue of being scorned by Metternich and his friends, though many countries with unrecognized status do also start out on the lower end of the technological scale. Yeah, that makes sense. The only difference I could see would be the difficulty in industrializing, but that's kind of a diplomacy thing as well, because I'm thinking, the ability to trade in the resources to industrialize, but trade is basically diplomacy as well, right? So yeah, I can't. Civs and uncivilized nations in Victoria 2 had a lot of trouble. They had I'm pretty sure they only had the ability to create what were they called? The crappy infantry. It wasn't full good infantry. It was irregulars. I'm pretty sure that's what they were limited to, and obviously they couldn't become a great power, so they couldn't have any spherelings or anything of that nature. But yeah, now it's just going to be a diplomatic thing, which makes sense because, whether you are recognized as a great power or not is purely diplomacy. Another example here apparently is the Qing. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that right. Is it King, Qing, Qing, Fling? I don't know. We're going to go with Qing. Though it has among the highest prestige ratings in the world, Great Qing's status as an unrecognized country severely limits its potential to rank among the nations of the world. So it currently holds the rank of unrecognized power with an overall score position of 80 in the world, with 1122 prestige. If the prestige of Great Qing is reduced below 55 for an extended time, their rank will decrease to unrecognized minor power. Great Qing cannot receive a higher rank than unrecognized power due to their unrecognized country status, limiting to a maximum store position of 80 in the world, and they are indeed 80. So these are the strongest unrecognized powers in the world. And I think that would then imply that there are 79 recognized countries in the world, which is certainly an interesting thought. Maybe someone can come up with a list of them all. I imagine the German miners are gonna have... There's a lot of those. It's probably a lot of those. But yeah, no, it's interesting. We'll find out how many countries there are that are recognized in the world. Or in the game, I should say. All in all, there are 6 different ranks that a country can occupy in Victoria 3, as well as a special 7th rank that only applies to decentralized and those are non-playable. The African nations, I think, is what those are, right? And so it isn't of any real interest to talk about today. Please note that the names of some of these may be subject to change. So we have the Great Power. These are the most powerful and glorious of nations, and often have a global reach, getting involved in far-off conflicts. Most obvious example of a great power at the start of the game is Great Britain. Of course, in Victoria 2, there were 8 great powers, and these were the only countries able to partake in the diplomacy of, sphering other nations, which was a great boon to a great power's economy, unless you sphered Qing. Because that would break the game, so don't do that. We have Major Power. These are regional powerhouses that often decide the course of conflicts in their home regions and may have a limited global presence. For example, we have the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, which I'm sure all of you know, but in case you don't, that's the region of Naples, the southern tip of the boot of Italy, and also including Sicily itself. We have minor power, regional powers that may be important for determining how a local conflict in their home region turns out, but are generally irrelevant on the world stage, such as Mexico. An insignificant power is a nation that generally does not even have the ability to influence the outcome of local conflicts and can be safely ignored by anyone other than other insignificant powers in their immediate vicinity, such as the free city of Krakow, again, it's another one it's a Polish word. I don't that language is insane, so I don't know. Krakow, whatever. We have the unrecognized power. It's a powerful and prestigious enough to throw their weight around on a regional stage, try to resist the demands of the recognized powers, and to be a potential candidate for recognition, such as the Qing Empire, which we discussed above. And then we have the unrecognized minor power. It's an unrecognized power that generally lacks the power to go up against anyone other than the weakest of recognized powers, will often find themselves at the mercy of great and major powers and having to play them against each other to survive. And we have the Kingdom of Nepal as the example for that. Lovely. So then, what benefits does a rank confer? Generally, the higher a country's rank, the more influence capacity it generates, allowing for a greater freedom in conducting diplomacy and signing diplomatic pacts. The more declared interests it can support, and the more maneuvers it has in diplomatic plays. Our rank also plays a key role in many other systems such as subjects, infamy, diplomatic actions, and more, some of which we'll be getting to in the coming weeks. And yeah, we've only just started on diplomacy, so a lot of these things are still to come. We see here that France is in fact the second rank great power in Victoria 3, which is different from Victoria 2, where France was third after the Russian Empire. And France starts with current prestige of 730, and if we have a look back at Qing, 1122, so you can see the kind of distance there, but I guess China's a bit older than France. Just by a little smudge. Anything else we can see here? Well, we have what I'm assuming is the leader of France, which is that Napoleon III? Or no, Napoleon III is still exiled in Switzerland at this point, right? I don't recall who the leader of France is at this time. My apologies. But we also get a little bit of information about France, their population, their literacy, their average standard of living, them being Catholic and French, only having just French as a culture, no other cultures accepted at this time, and also the amount of arable land that they have, as well as the amount of, I am assuming, the amount of divisions that they have, and also the amount of navy, perhaps. 105 is a lot larger than what France starts with at the start of the game, but perhaps it is not individual boats, but instead naval capacity, which is something that we saw in Victoria 2, where certain boats took up certain amounts of naval capacity, and you generally didn't want to go over that. That's probably what that is. And then, yeah, divisions. 260 seems very large, so there's probably something in there as well to make it that number. I'm struggling to believe that we're going to literally have 260 divisions to play with as France at the start of the game. Anyway, moving on. Prestige, as was mentioned above, plays a central role in all of this. Simply put, prestige is what determines who gets to occupy what rank in the global pecking order. Unlike in Victoria 1 and Victoria 2, where prestige was just one of three factors determining what rank a country had, the others being industrialization and military power, in Victoria 3, prestige is the accumulation of all factors that makes a country more or less glorious. In order to become a certain rank, a country must meet the prestige threshold for that rank, which is based on both how it compares to the global average and percentile-wise compared to the most prestigious country. So, to explain what he means by that, here's a look at the current requirements to be a great power. You must be a recognized country, you must not be a subject of another nation, and you must have at least 3 times the average global prestige, or at least 75% of the prestige of the most prestigious nation. Very interesting. It's really hard to say if this is I mean, I assume it's going to work, but it's really hard to make judgments on this. But I'm sure when we get down to the comments, somebody's going to make a comment on how this is ridiculous and silly and all that, but there's really no way to tell at this point. You must have trust. But I think it's very interesting that instead of having prestige, militarization, and industrialization, instead prestige is all three. Because I'm assuming there's still going to be prestige events, and prestige from arts, I think, is already confirmed to be a thing. But then also getting prestige from the size of your military and the size of your navy is super interesting, because that means that if, for example, you're in a bit of a hefty war and the size of your military shrinks considerably, well, that's your prestige going down instead of just your military, which will bounce back very easily. So, yeah, no, it's I think it's definitely a lot more flexible to use prestige in this regard. So, this means two things. The number of great powers, major powers, and so on is not fixed to a specific number as it was in Vicky 1 and 2, where we'd always have 8 of each, and that the requirements to maintain and increase your rank will change over the course of a game. A country might start as a great power due to their starting prestige, but then quickly begin falling behind due to economic and military stagnation, eventually being reduced to a major power, even though their actual prestige number never went down. And I think at this point it is probably wise to go and have a look at what the starting situation for the ranks in Victoria 3 are, and for that we'll go over to the Twitter teaser. So here we have it, the top 10 nations in Victoria 3 to start the game, and there is certainly some interesting stuff here. For example, we know from the comments that this is being taken from the perspective of Great Britain, and that them being neutral towards themselves is something that needs fixing. It should not be there at all right? But it's also very interesting to see that France in second and Russia in third, they've swapped places. In fourth place is Austria, who were fifth, and Prussia, who in Victoria 2 were 4th, are now down in 7th. We have the USA, who were 8th, has jumped up to 5th. The Ottomans, who were 7th, have jumped up to 6th. We've already talked about Prussia. And then we've got the East India Company, which is not it's not an independent nation at all, but instead a vassal of the Great Britain, is there as the 8th strongest in the world. And then rounding it out, we have Spain, who have dropped from 6th position all the way to 9th, and the Netherlands, who I'm pretty sure were the 9th. So they were the top-ranked major power in Victoria 2. They're now in 10th. We can also tell that in this screenshot, the start of the game has only 7 great powers, and you can see that by the golden little border around the flag. And we can also see some of the starting relationships between different countries. So France and Britain are obviously cold to one another. Great Britain doesn't really like the Ottoman Empire or Spain, but they're cordial with the USA, they're cordial with Prussia. They like their vassal, who would have thunk it, and they're pretty cordial with the Netherlands as well. I think the biggest change, I guess, here is both the introduction of East India Company here on the list, and also the would you call it nerfing or reshuffling of Prussia? Going from 4th to 7th is pretty huge, but we'll see. We'll see if these are the final numbers. We'll see if prestige for all these countries is calculated as it will be on release or not. It is something that we shall keep an eye on. But anyway, back to the dev diary itself, and we have a look at Persia. Persia is able to occupy a rank position above what its economy and army can support through considerable investment into the arts. And we can see that here. Their prestige is 127, and they have plus 40 from the arts, one from an arts academy in Laristan and another one in Sistan. They are, however, an unrecognized power, so they can never get higher than 80, and they would be struggling to get the rank of 80 from Qing, with, you know, a prestige rank that's an order of magnitude lower. Though, you know, they could become recognized maybe if they beat the crap out of the Ottomans or something along those lines. Certainly doable. It could be a fun run. You can see their population and literacy, standard of living, all of that good stuff as well. Nowhere near as much arable land as France. They've got their GDP on there as well. Not a huge naval power, and their military is also relatively small as well. Some interesting stuff to glean from that. We can also tell definitively that the number we've got here next to the flag, which we've seen a bunch of in other screenshots, is their rank. So that is now, I imagine, confirmed. I can't see anyone making an argument that this could be anything else at this point. So, moving down. What can give your country prestige? A lot of things, apparently. A lot of things. Some of these, but no means an exhaustive list, is the tier of a country. Whether it's considered a city-state, principality, kingdom, and so on, gives it a little bit of base-level prestige. It's inherent to a specific nation and can only be increased by forming a new, more glorious nation. So, this means that, for example, what would be a country that would grow quite large, or grow quite a bit? Let's take America. It's already pretty swole, but it's going to grow quite a bit by annexing land from Mexico. But it's not going to get a higher rank, even though it's annexing a bunch more territory, because it's not going to be called anything new. It's not going to form a new tag, which is something else that's a bit interesting. We'll go on that in just a moment about tags. But yeah, it's inherent to the country, and you can only increase it by forming a new country. So if Prussia annexes all of the German minors but doesn't become the North German Federation or later on Germany, it's not going to get the benefits of their tier from that expansion, unless they, like I said, form the other nations. Interesting. Having a large army gives prestige, with more prestige given based on its ability to both fight effectively and look imposing. So I imagine this means that the prestige for your army is both based on the size of it and on the amount of technologies that you can pump into it. So potentially I could see a situation where all of the army techs, say, breech-loaded rifles. Say you are researching that, you finally achieved it, and breech-loading rifles gives you the modifier of -1 combat width, plus 10% fire rate on your infantry, and also plus 1% prestige for your army, something like that, or something along those lines. I could totally see that being a thing. So a high-tech nation can kind of punch a little bit above its weight in prestige as well as on the battlefield. That could be interesting. Having a large, powerful, and impressive-looking navy gives prestige to an even greater degree than the army. This is something that I think is very important in the Victoria series, and something that they do to a better extent than I think any other game in Paradox's arsenal, and that is the importance of the navy. Naval dominance in Vicky 2 was worth more than naval dominance in EU4 or in Imperative Rome. It's certainly worth more than it is in the Crusader Kings, because that we just don't talk about that. It's useless. But yeah, the navy being important in Vicky is still the case, and that is fantastic to see. Not only does it give you a bunch of prestige, but it's also pretty useful for like projecting power and winning wars that you otherwise wouldn't. Fantastic stuff. We have the total GDP, and thus indirectly the level of industrialization of a country gives it prestige. Okay, nice. I like that. Subjects contribute prestige to the suzerain based on their military and economic might. So if we go back and have a look at this here, the East India Company being in 8th place is probably giving a hefty amount of prestige to Great Britain. Because if it's 8th on its own, based on its prestige, based on the strength of its army and navy and economy, and it's getting to 8th on its own, and it's giving Britain prestige based on that, that's going to boost Great Britain very significantly, which makes absolute sense historically as well. If you are a global leader, first, second, or third, in the production of a good, it gives the country prestige, with some goods being more prestigious than others. Nice. Say if you're the leading producer of coal, you'll get prestige for that. If you're the leading producer of telephones a bit later in the game, probably even more from that. Makes sense. Building and supporting art academies, or being a sponsor of the arts, gives prestige, and we saw that with Persians scrolling up a bit. And then successfully undertaking certain globally recognized projects, such as undertaking major expeditions to certain regions of the world, or the construction of a canal, can give a country a permanent increase in its prestige. Going to be the first person to reach the South Pole, or the North Pole, finding the source of the Nile. These are all things that were in Victoria 2 and would be missed if it was not in Victoria 3. And that is it for today for the Dev Diary. Next week we'll be looking at relations, infamy, and interests. So definitely I'm looking forward to seeing that. Relations between different countries, the amount of infamy. Infamy in Victoria 2 was certainly a unique system, so seeing if that is replicated or changed in Victoria 3, I'm definitely looking forward to. And interests as well. Fantastic stuff. There is one more thing that I want to share that isn't the comments just yet, and that is this right here. We were talking just a moment ago about the tier of country and forming new glorious nations, so tag switching. And this here is from Wiz, talking about those tags. The plan is to lock away any silly formables and releasables we add behind a game rule, so you can turn them off if you don't like the idea of them. And I think this is the thing game rules are perfect for. Personally, I enjoy having very alt history formables, but I know it breaks some people's immersion. And I think it would be hilarious if, like, the only tag that gets locked behind this game rule thing is the Roman Empire. I was going to say Byzantium, but I hate that name. It's the Roman Empire. I would love it if that was like the only one, because it's such a meme at this point. Forming the Roman Empire in Victoria 2 is like, as Greece of course, is like pretty difficult anyway. So it's not something you see too terribly often. But I just think it'd be funny to see that. But yeah, I'm totally cool with this. This is the best of both worlds. For the people like me who enjoy seeing these wacky formables, and then perfectly fine. If people don't want to see them though, they perfectly fine. You can turn them off. It's the best of both worlds. I see no reason to complain about this. Fantastic news. Alright, so let us get into the comments, and to do that, I will do that. Lovely. So, first up, we have Alfred Dreyfus. The starting GPs should be the same as Vicky 2. Why? Out of curiosity, why? I think it was fantastic to see the two great powers of EU4 start as sick great powers at the start and watch them decline and go down the tier list as a substitution of the new 19th century great powers. Spain should be in the same tier as the USA and Ottomans in 1836, and Prussia should go above them. So just to remind, these are the great powers that we have right now, and you know, I will do a thing so we can see them both at the same time. Right, there we go. We can see them all at the same time. Like I say, Great Britain is, well, I mean, it's renamed from the United Kingdom to Great Britain, so that's one thing there. And he's saying here that Spain should be in the same tier as the USA and Ottomans. So he's thinking that Spain should be in the Great Power, and he likes to see it go down, and Prussia should be above the USA and the Ottomans. I mean, why exactly? What are the... You don't actually give any reasons for it. Please don't put the East India Company as the 8th strongest nation in the game. It's insane. The East India Company was by no means the 7th most powerful nation in the world in 1836. I think it's a very bad decision gameplay-wise, too. It shouldn't have enough power to intervene in Europe in 1836, for example. Is there more? No. Okay, good. Before I get into the comment, what I would say to that is they're not putting anyone anywhere, and they didn't put anyone anywhere in Victoria 2 either. Their ranking was based on gameplay factors, right? The only thing that was put anywhere was the amount of prestige each of the nations had. And you could argue that maybe Prussia is overvalued or Austria is undervalued or anything of the sort in the game at this point. But their industrialization score and their military score was kind of, it's based on the historical research that the devs did for Victoria 2, and it's the same here, right? They didn't put Prussia in 7th. Prussia was placed there by an algorithm that determined them to be 7th based on their prestige and based on the other thing that was mentioned as determining your rank, which I've completely blanked on. It's not that they're like, okay, we're going to go and put Prussia here, and we're going to say no, Prussia's weak compared to the Ottomans. So the Ottomans go there. That's not what's happening here. But anyway, let's read the comment. The list isn't based on us manually ranking countries. Yeah, it's basically exactly what I said. It's based on how the game currently calculates prestige, which is a calculation that's likely going to change before release. I don't think any other way Victoria 2 calculates it is necessarily correct either. Prussia was definitely not stronger than Austria in 1836, for example, as far as my understanding of history goes. Fair enough. Cyprus says he doesn't like the idea of a government tier list like in EU4. My dude... Well, firstly, thank you, Alfred Dreyfus, for actually posting this so I didn't have to go find it. Victoria 2 predates EU4. No, well, the Great Power list in EU4 wasn't there on release, and Victoria 2 predates the release of EU4. So, I mean, shut up. Even if it was waning, the idea that some crowns and nations are more prestigious than others was absolutely a thing in the 19th century, and it serves as a useful measure of what is a rank up when forming a new nation. Lovely. You mentioned ways to gain prestige, but are there ways to lose it? So prestige is calculated, as we have learned in the dev diary that you probably should have read before making a comment. If your economy or army shrinks, your prestige will go down. You can also get a permanent and or temporary increases and decreases. Yeah, like I said before, it's very interesting the way prestige works, because if you get spanked in a war and your army size is decimated, your prestige goes down. Yeah, so yeah, there is. It's a logical conclusion of the mechanics that we were already told about. As a German, I would contradict them. It's not for nothing that Prussia defeated Austria in every war in which they clashed. He's probably here, I believe, complaining about Prussia being beneath Austria here. So, they did not fight any wars in 1836. Prussia grew stronger than Austria in the coming decades, but their position in 1836 was not a terribly strong one. 1866, it's a whole other picture, but the game doesn't start in 1866. Fair enough. I personally don't have a horse in this race. I don't know who was stronger in 1836 between Austria and Prussia. It's not my area of knowledge, so I'm going to pass no comment either way on that one. But the devs seem to believe that Prussia was weaker than Austria in 1836, and sure, I have no reason to disbelieve them. This looks wonderful. I agree. One question. I hope gaining enough prestige does not automatically release a subject country like in Victoria 2. What he's referring to here is if you were playing as, for example, the East India Company, right? And I know it wasn't really called that in Vicky 2, right? But whatever. Say you're playing as them. So, let's go with Canada, right? Say you're playing as Canada and you become incredibly prestigious to the point where you can rank up and turn into a great power. That would automatically free you from being a dominion of Great Britain, which is a little bit awkward. As a side note, I think those art academies have slightly too high impact on prestige. I believe there were 20 each, right? Considering France started with like 600, was it 600? Let me just check again. They started with 730. My apologies, just need to check that. I think I would agree with that. Maybe it is a little bit high. Perhaps it could be modified to some sort of broader cultural influence resource, like what language is being spoken on parties, whose theatre plays are being discussed, etc. Anyway, he loves the idea that prestige is now a combination of military and GDP. Wonderful decision. So the answer to that is just all numbers are very much non-final when it comes to things like how much prestige art academies give. Nothing to do with this, though, interestingly. Can a nation jump from unrecognized power straight to a great power? If they gain recognition while having high enough prestige to qualify, then yes. And I imagine that's probably what we're going to see from the likes of Japan. Won't the average prestige system cause problems? I knew it was going to be a thing. As small nations are annexed in the first years, pushing the average way up and then throwing many countries out of great power status. So, there are built-in things in the system to prevent this. Basically, there's a normalizing effect based on how many countries there are on the map, so that numbers don't get too radically shifted due to too few or too many nations. What those are, who knows? So, can't really go into it anymore. My major question is, what is the process of getting recognized? As the Qing, could I defeat the UK in the Opium Wars to gain recognition, like Japan sort of did by defeating Russia in the 1900s? Am I that wrong on the date? Because I was saying 1800 and something. My bad. Or is there a system underneath for determining whether you're recognized or not? It's something we'll go into in a later dev diary, but we've definitely looked at the Russo-Japanese War as inspiration for parts of the mechanic. That's what I like to see. Lovely. You take an example from history, you extrapolate it to see what it would be like if it was from multiple countries, and you base your mechanic somewhat on it. Fantastic, great news, love it. It would be simpler to just have it based on percentage of total prestige. It seems like it could make the problem of too few or too many nations worse, as it might be much easier to have 10% of all prestige if there's 20 nations than if there are 200, though prestige would scale up to the greater size of countries, so it could work, but what we have now works quite well as it is. Yeah, is it like, what, the second comment that is like complaining about the way that prestige is, and we have no information other than what's given? And so, hey, maybe you should do this way instead. But apparently it works quite well as it is. So why? I'm sure they have investigated whether percentage of total prestige works, because that would be like the most base level obvious one to do if you're going to do a system like this. But yeah, they've determined this is better, so I don't know what there is to complain about here, to be honest. Can a nation go from recognized to unrecognized? If not through game mechanic, can it be done with scripting? Yes. How that would happen? No idea. Maybe if Spain gets beaten up super hard by France and loses the majority of its land, and then it's like just confined to Galicia or something, then it will get unrecognized. Who knows? Maybe that's how it would happen. If one nation really runs away with it, does it still make sense for others to be viewed as great powers? Let's say a nation has more than 3 times the global average, but less than, say, 25% of the leader. Should it still be considered a great power? The intent is to try and avoid runaway scenarios where there is just one great power left due to the impact it would have on various diplomatic mechanics. I think if we want to simulate a power rising above the other great powers, we should think about adding a rank above great power instead. I think that would probably be a good idea. It's something that maybe, like, certainly in this time period, that never happened, right? There was no one single power that was so far ahead of everyone else that it deserved to have its own category, right? It wasn't a thing. One could argue that the USA is there today. I would argue against it, but one could argue that point effectively enough. But yeah, I'd say it would be probably nice because, I mean, a player, if they take Great Britain and go absolutely ham, yeah, you could probably foresee a situation where a very accomplished player or a min-maxer would be able to have that happen. Becoming the only great power I can see the Spiffing Brit video already. I can see the thumbnail. I am the only great power in the world, or something along those lines for the title. I can see it now. So yeah, having a rank above, maybe something like Hegemon or something like that, would be probably a good idea. Having dynamic requirements for great powers and such sounds very nice. I agree. If hypothetically every country would be recognized, free, and all had the exact same prestige, what would be the tiebreaker to determine the actual order of ranks? GDP is a tiebreaker for two countries with the exact same prestige. Would all countries be great powers, since all of them would be within 75% of whoever ranks number 1? If everyone had the exact same prestige, everyone would be a great power, but due to the various normalization mechanics we built into the game, this basically cannot happen, short of some extreme modding. Just to re-emphasize, the rankings are not final and probably not really correct. For example, the US probably shouldn't be number 5, and the East India Company probably shouldn't be number 8. Whether Spain should start as a great power or a major power is something where I haven't really made up his mind yet. Fair enough. Thinking the same, almost doubting if it's trolling values to lure people like us in the comment section. Probably not. So there are, all of these values are work in progress, as indicated by the work in progress images placed in the screenshots. Final balancing of all values isn't done until close to release. In fact, one thing that we'll often do during development is to set overpowered values to things on purpose so we can see how it feels to play with and gradually adjust down. The reason we do this is that setting values on features too low from the start can lead to testers ignoring the feature and it being more or less forgotten about. That's a really cool little insider tidbit, actually. What would be the tiebreaker if they have the same prestige and GDP? Exact same GDP is virtually impossible since it's a big value that scales down to 5 decimals. That's insane. That's so many. But if it happened against all the odds, then the country tag index would be the tiebreaker. How many country ranks will there be? Weren't we already told that earlier? Anyway, there's 7 currently, but they're completely moddable, so there isn't really a limit on how many there can be. Lovely. We've got Dreyfus here again. He was specifically worried about the East India Company being number 8. About Spain, he thinks it fits more into the tier of USA and Ottomans than in the tier of Two Sicilies. Okay. And there's his idea of where they should be. Whatever. The Kingdom of Two Sicilies was by far the strongest Italian power in 1836 and also the most industrialized one. As with Prussia and Austria, don't confuse the 1830s with later decades. Very, very, like, shoo. Here, have a little bit of information, but like, shoo, we're done with this, basically, is what I'm reading from that anyway. Is there a certain optimal balance and ratio to maintain between certain aspects of prestige? In Victoria 2, we had prestige spam, where someone would just take cultural texts and use prestige events to push them into being a great power regardless of the 2 other factors. Yeah, that was very much an issue in Vicky 2. Will there be anything that would, say, cause diminishing returns for one aspect of prestige if it's much higher than the others? If I just built a bunch of art academies and got prestige that way while having a navy staffed by 3 guys in a dinghy and an army that has shoes for weapons, would the art academies give me less prestige as it goes up higher than the other aspects? So there's nothing like that right now, but it's for sure on the way on the list to look at. As yes, he doesn't think a country should be able to be a great power on art alone. Persia. Probably France as well, let's be honest, they like their art. So, tell me which of the reigning great powers in 1836 consider the East India Company is its equal? None. According to the game, they're not. They're a fucking secondary power that don't have the golden ring. We've gone over this. A country under the dominion of another is largely subservient to its overlord in diplomatic matters. If someone wants to mess with the East India Company, they're also forced to deal with Great Britain, so their recognition status is largely irrelevant under these circumstances. But what really matters is what happens if a subject nation gains its independence. If the East India Company decided to mount a rebellion against the crown and successfully became an independent major power in the Indian subcontinent, would the great powers treat it with some modicum of respect? Yeah, for beating Great Britain, yeah. Or would they be considered irrelevant other than as a ripe target for exploitation? They would be that too, let's be honest. The game mechanics argue that the former makes more sense. I would agree. And to be clear, if an unrecognized country is puppeted and subsequently released, its status as unrecognized remains. Interesting. Alright. I think that's all incredibly interesting. And it's another decent dev diary, let's be honest. There's nothing to complain about. There's nothing to complain about, in my opinion. Like I say, we know the preliminary rankings, but as was mentioned in the comments already, these are subject to change, and we could likely see them change as well. It's not just a possibility. So yeah, right now, nothing to complain about. That's a like from me. But it's a like from you. Let me know in the comment section below what you think about this dev diary. Do you agree with what you have read here today? What are your thoughts? I'm very interested to see them. Do you prefer the way that Victoria 2 does Great Power Rankings? Do you think there should be a set number? All this, leave it in the comment section below. I'll be excited to read it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.